On tonight's Monday Night Travel, we're joined by our friend and guidebook author Pat O'Connor as he takes us on a tour of majestic Northern Ireland. After some fun in the bustling capital of Belfast, we'll visit the whiskey-steeped Antrim Coast and then dive into diverse Derry. Thanks for joining us as we explore these and other highlights of this breathtaking corner of Europe.
Hello and welcome to Monday Night Travel. Tonight, we are going to wander through the beautiful northern part of the Emerald Isle. My name is Ben Green, and I'll be your host. And now I have the privilege of introducing tonight's special guest. Pat O'Connor is a talented guidebook co-author, a former tour guide in Ireland, and a former travel consultant here at Rick Steves Europe. Please join me in welcoming Pat. Pat, where are you? There you are.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Wow, I'm excited to talk about a place that is fascinating and really underrated, I think.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure, and I'm glad you could join us in person.
Super, super.
Now,
I'm excited.
Pat, you've been retired for a few years. How have you been enjoying your retirement?
I've been enjoying it very much. Of course, COVID sort of impacted that, but I'm ready to get back on the road again and can't wait to get back to Ireland in particular.
Now, how many years did you work for Rick Steves Europe, and how did you first get started with this?
So I started with Rick in 1997 and 25 years with Rick.
I won't say how old I was.
But I actually, back in college, bought Rick's very first edition of Europe Through the Back Door back in 1980, my spring term in college, because I knew I wanted to travel, and really fell in love with Ireland. It's part of my heritage. My dad got me into it. It's near and dear to my heart, the whole island. And then, as luck would have it, I got on board with Rick in 97, and he got me on board with co-authoring his Ireland Guidebook, which is a pleasure for me. We started it in 2002, and this is probably the last edition that I'll be working on, really, with any help. But anyway, yeah.
Amazing, Pat. Well, it's such a pleasure to have someone with your level of expertise to share this interesting and complex region with us.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. Well, I think we can get started here, shall we?
Absolutely.
I'll turn it over to you, Pat. I may ask you a question as we go along, but
please do. Please do, Ben. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. So, folks, we're in Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland is a place that I really feel is underrated, and I hope I can show you the highlights of it here over the next hour. Extremely scenic place, very historic, friendlier than you might think because of the bad press of the Troubles back in the 60s and 70s. And so let's get started. So Northern Ireland is only about 17% of the island of Ireland. Northern Ireland is about the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island combined together. Sounds fairly small, like you could see it in a day, but it really takes more than that to do it justice. And I just want to plant this seed right at the start. If your heritage is Scots-Irish, then this is your homeland. So those of you who are interested in genealogy along those lines, this is where I'd point you. Now, our travels today will be mostly along the coast of Ireland, but at the end, I'll do a loop through the interior to help you get an idea for that. So just a bit about the current events in Ireland. Brexit, you probably heard about it. Don't worry about it at all for your travels. It is not an issue for you to get over the border and back. It's clean and easy. They didn't want to make a higher hurdle for you to have to leap over to visit. So that's good for us. But looking at this graphic, it shows that in the elections, I can't recall if it was half a dozen years ago or how long ago was the Brexit vote?
2016.
2016.
I was in Poland at the time, so
thank you, Ben. Well. Yeah, thank you. So what this shows us is that Northern Ireland and Scotland, and don't forget London down there in the bottom, all those places in blue voted to stay inside the EU, but the places in red voted to leave the EU. And that's what they did. They had more votes to leave. So it's been quite controversial, and they're still working it out, but don't let it impact your travels at all. Now, getting into just a bit of Irish history, the whole island was subdivided over traditional, centuries into 32 different counties. What we're looking at here are the four different provinces of the island of Ireland, and our focus today is going to be on the orange part up in the north. Now, that's larger than Northern Ireland. There are 3 counties up there in orange that are still part of the Republic of Ireland. So really, Northern Ireland is just 6 counties, smaller than what we see there on that map. Northern Ireland experienced the same kind of major events that the rest of Ireland experienced with Brexit, or pardon me, with the coming of Christianity and with the coming of the Normans. But where things really diverged for Northern Ireland versus the rest of the island is when King James became king of England back in 1603. And he had just defeated the Irish in a famous battle down in Kinsale. And the leaders of that battle had fled to the mainland to raise more troops. And in the meantime, he decided to plant loyal colonists in the north of Ireland in order to make it less of a problem. And they really became quite a it's the only place that how should I put this, that the plantation really took root, was in the north. So what we're talking about here are people that were originally from Scotland, came in the early 1600s. They stayed in Ulster for 3 or 4 or 5 generations, maybe through the 1600s. They still didn't have all the land that they needed, so they went over to the 13 colonies in the 1700s. And there they still couldn't find the land that they wanted, so they went over the Appalachians to settle places like Kentucky and Tennessee. So, for example, the music, Ben, when you listen to bluegrass music in Kentucky or Tennessee, that's rooted way back into these Ulster Scots and sort of Celtic style music.
I really had no idea, Pat, to be honest.
Yeah. Now, at the same time as the Ulster Scots were beginning to flourish, the famine in Ireland back in the 1840s was hardest on the indigenous Irish, who were kind of pushed off to the side by the planters who came in. And when that famine hit, at that time, there were 8 million people in Ireland and 12 million on the island of Britain. But today, there are 65 million on the island of Britain and only 5 million in Ireland. So that's the impact of the famine. My people came across in the 1850s because of the famine and the decade afterwards. Now, the Industrial Revolution hit. People began to try and find work in the cities, starving people from the famine. And really, the watershed moment here was when World War I came around. That's when Britain needed to decide afterwards what they were going to do with Northern Ireland. So they made it an independent province, separate from what became the Free State of Ireland, which is now the Republic of Ireland. But what I'm showing you here in this image is we're looking at blood-stained dirt inside of that bag from the Battle of the Somme. That was holy ground, 1916. And the British blood was shed by Northern Irish guys to maintain the union with Britain. So they never want to forget that. You see that on their drums when they're marching. We'll talk about the marching season here in a second. When Northern Ireland was created in 1920, they had their own parliament, which they still do, the National Assembly. And I'll just mention this briefly, that this picture I took on 9/12. This is where I was the day after 9/11 with the tour group. And that's why those flags are at half-mast above the basically the parliamentary building, if you want to think of it that way, the Northern Assembly. Couldn't have been friendlier people, because they had lived with the threat of terrorism for quite a while, and it was kind of new to us. So they were super kind to us. Now, if you're looking at the electoral districts of the north, you can see that the really splattered pattern of nationalist Catholic and Unionist Protestants. And I don't want to drill too deep on this, but just think of the nationalist Catholics as the indigenous people who were there before the 1600s. And the Unionist Protestant folks who came in really settled more on the eastern side of Northern Ireland. So you can see that in the orange color, orange for King William of Orange, who we'll talk about later. So that's just sort of an idea of the splatter pattern there. And in our guidebooks, I just want to mention that we kind of break down, help you to understand a little bit better sort of the intricacies of Northern Ireland politics. And, you know, I want to talk about travel here, but just so you get a feel for this, nationalists who feel really Irish wish that they could reunite with the Republic of Ireland. Unionists, over there on the right in orange, feel a strong kinship with Britain because their heritage is from Britain. Their great-great-great-great-grandfathers, their relatives came across from Britain in the 1600s. So they feel British. They want to maintain that union. The Catholic nationalists want to hopefully, in their eyes, reunite with the rest of Ireland. And that's actually a question that's come up. We don't know when or if it might happen, but we never thought that East and West Germany would reunite either. So, yeah.
And my understanding is most regular people fall into the moderate camp.
They are definitely in the moderates. But this is just sort of showing you a spectrum from the most strident nationalists in Sinn Féin versus the most strident unionists in the DUP, political parties we're talking about there. So let's talk about travel here. How do you get to Northern Ireland? Well, Northern Ireland does not have great connections to the United States. No nonstops that I'm aware of. So I find it easier. Most big cities in the States, you know, we're in Seattle, LA, you know, Atlanta, Newark, you know, most of them have a nonstop to Dublin. And I find going into Dublin and taking a short 90-minute bus ride up into the north is easier than flying into London and spending 2.5 hours at Heathrow and all that goes with that. And the other thing about flying over there is that quite often you'll have to switch airlines in London. And that's an invitation to have your bags lost. So just a bit about that. And this is the air coach. This is what I would suggest that you folks look for when you land. It's 5 minutes away from the baggage claim area. You hop on board and it's a much simpler way to get up to Belfast. I figure it's about, from Seattle here, it's about 12 to 13 hours for me to get to Belfast using this combination, whereas if I flew through London or Amsterdam, it would be closer to 15 or 16.
And it drops you off in central Belfast as well.
Right at the Europa Hotel. Yeah, you're right. So what about driving up there? Well, my first suggestion is that you stop and pray. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I am a fan of driving in Ireland, except in the cities. Dublin, it's a ball and chain. Belfast is manageable, but unnecessary. So to get out to the hinterland, definitely a car is something to consider. And so here's just driving 101 in Ireland. I'm a big fan of the Google Maps Street View, which really demystifies what you're going to be driving through, so you don't have to be uptight about it. You can scroll that thing right down the road on your entire route and understand what you'll be faced with. And understand that the roads are a shared experience. It's not just you and me and my side of the road and your side of the road. It's a shared experience. And of course, I'm sure you know that they do drive on the other side of the road, which is the left side of the road, and you get used to it. But that's the name of the game in pretty much any former British colony. So when I'm over in Europe, stick shifts are much more prevalent than in the States, and stick shifts are about 25% cheaper than an automatic. So weirdly enough, at home I drive an automatic, but in Europe I drive a stick shift. And stick shift is cheaper with the mileage, and is a bit of an adjustment, of course. But at least the gas, the brake, and the clutch are in the same places you're used to in the States. And the stick shift has the same H pattern. So you do get the hang of it. I do have an official atlas, the Ordnance Survey Atlas. You can buy once you land in Ireland. Is the best old-fashioned atlas that I always have as a backup in case my technology fails. But my technology is quite often the Google Maps with a Wi-Fi hotspot that you're seeing there on the left, which makes it pretty easy to navigate over there compared to the way it used to be. Now, trains are fine, but they don't cover enough. They go from Dublin straight up to Belfast and all the way up to Derry, Londonderry, and they're fine where they exist. You know, they're roomy and not overpriced or anything. You can buy those tickets online in advance and save a couple bucks as well.
Now, for routes that are also covered by train, is taking the train preferable generally to the bus?
I would take a train over a bus because a train never gets stuck in traffic. Train, you can get up and walk around. I find that trains are usually more on schedule than buses, but I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth because the bus to get you from Dublin up to Belfast really is the best way. And it's only a 90-minute journey if you were making that flight connection. But if you were in Dublin overnight, maybe doing some things, and then the next day decided to go to Belfast, then I would take a train because you're going from downtown Dublin up there rather than from the airport.
Right.
That's the differentiation. Looking at this map, we've got showing you how the whole island is connected by train, but up in the north, it doesn't cover quite as much of the countryside. You can see that it doesn't cover the western half of Northern Ireland very well. So if you want to get out there, you're going to need a bus or a car beyond what we see here on the train lines. This is way back in 1981, Ben. Believe it or not, this is my first trip to Ireland. I'm sitting there reading Rick's first edition of Europe Through the Back Door. And meanwhile, Rick is out in the bogs, researching his second edition.
I love that hat.
Yeah, every tourist buys a tweed hat on their first trip to Ireland. It's just standard procedure. Buses are fine where they exist to bridge the gaps. And the ferry I'll just mention connects over to Scotland if you want to go over there. But if you're going to Edinburgh or to Glasgow, I would fly from Belfast straight over in an hour. It'd be cheaper and faster. Otherwise, you'd spend almost a full day connecting the mainland to the ferry and on both sides. So this is sort of a romantic idea, but a little clunky these days, the ferries. Belfast. So let's get into the destinations here. Belfast is obviously the place that you've probably heard of the most in Northern Ireland. It's a modern city. It's a growing city. It's a boom city, booming. And I don't mean that in the bomb way. I mean it in the economic way. It's refreshing in a way. I think you'd be surprised by Belfast. Belfast has a bad reputation that it has to live down, like Beirut or somewhere else that we've heard only in negative news over the decades. But it's really, I think, a hidden gem. If you're trying to get away from the crowds, Europe is very crowded. Consider Northern Ireland. If you're trying to get away from the heat of the Mediterranean, consider Northern Ireland. Okay, so here's a map from our guidebook showing the neighborhoods of Belfast. A great first day in Belfast is to buy a hop-on, hop-off bus ticket just to get a good 90-minute loop of the most important sites as you're moving around the city. Very handy. Belfast is a Victorian city. It's a red brick city. I wouldn't call it a graceful or gorgeous city, but it's a very friendly and very interesting city. There were only 20,000 people in Belfast in 1800, Ben, and there were 350,000 in 1900.
Wow.
So it just grew from a mud flat to a real titan of industry, especially shipbuilding, linen making, and rope making. Now, if you want to really get to know Northern Ireland, hire a local guide for a couple hours on your first morning over there, so that you really kind of get your feet set in a local's voice on how things kind of roll. This is Lynn Corkin, who's one of our guides and also a local guide in Belfast. She is absolutely excellent, and you'll find the contact information for people like this that I'm mentioning in our guidebook. So those details are there. So central Belfast is dominated by the dome of the City Hall. And you'll see that we're in Britain, right? We've got the Union Jack flag there, and we need to kind of remember that we've left the Republic of Ireland. We're in Britain. They use the British pound, or we're in the United Kingdom, I should say. We're in the United Kingdom. We're using the British pound up here. We're in the Republic of Ireland. We'd use the euro. City Hall is in the center of Belfast and is definitely worth a visit. In the main hall of City Hall, just gorgeous architecture, but super historic and very, very important to the Unionist side of the community, the British feeling side of the community, because back in 1912, they signed, in some cases in blood, in that main lobby on this table on a Union flag, that they did not want to be separated from Britain. They wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, where the Home Rule Bill that passed in 1914 said they might be part of an independent Ireland. And the British feeling people, the Unionists in the North, said, no way. Signed that covenant. 500,000 people, believe it or not, signed that. And even raised their own militia to potentially, this is really weird pretzel logic, but to potentially fight against their own British brethren to remain within Britain, not to break away. They didn't want to adhere to the Home Rule Bill that they felt would sell them kind of down the road. They felt that Home Rule was Rome rule. So they were paranoid of Catholic domination. And all these guys ended up in World War I fighting in the trenches instead. So Belfast is a very Victorian city. As I mentioned, it was built on the wealth of the Industrial Revolution. One of my favorite things to do in Belfast, Ben, is to visit this hotel, which is the Merchant Hotel, to have high tea. Mm-hmm. And that high tea chamber you see there on the right used to be the main lobby of the bank. This used to be a bank building. So you get a feeling for the wealth that was injected into Northern Ireland, especially back in the 1880s and 1890s. Now, if you don't want to spend big money, definitely a great, kind of average man's lunch options would be here at the St. George's Market. And, it's just a fun, just to people watch, if nothing else.
And cuisine in Northern Ireland is improving.
It is improving. Yeah, yeah. Don't believe what your Aunt Mabel told you about a trip 50 years ago or something, that food really has improved quite a bit. What's happened there, the chefs were expatriate chefs off in Europe. They come back with new skills and they've really upped the game. Victoria Square, I'll just mention this briefly, has great views it's a huge shopping center in the middle of Belfast and has terrific views if you do nothing else in that shopping center. And again, I just want to emphasize that we use two different currencies in these two countries, the euro in the Republic of Ireland and the pound up there in the north. This is, believe it or not, Ben, 7 different 10-pound notes. They're all identically in value. There's the same amount. But on the left, you'll see the Northern Irish pounds, which are issued by Northern Irish banks, Ulster Bank and Bank of Ireland, and the Northern Bank is now called Danske Bank. This is an older photo. On the right side, you'll see all the Scottish pounds from different Scottish banks. And in the middle, you'll see the standard British pound. Again, this is an older bill. I don't think the Queen is still on it. I'm not sure. But all of these are worth the same amount. You take them into a bank and they can change them. But it's going to be an adjustment for you to be, sort of seeing all this.
So just to clarify, Pat, if I'm in Northern Ireland and I get money from an ATM and then I go to London, I'm to take whatever 10 pounds I have from Northern Ireland, I have to go to a bank, I have to change them to English pounds.
That's it. You got it exactly right, Ben. What you don't want to do is to change your money at someplace that's just convenient. I love Kelly's Bar, and I'm going to show you a middle picture of it here in a minute, but they'll change your money, but at a very bad exchange rate to you. That's just standard for anybody who does that that's not a bank. They'll round it up for a bit of a profit for them. So do it at the bank if you're going to change money, and do get your money out of an ATM when you first land there. So here's one of my favorite bars in Belfast. Just give you a sort of an idea here. This is Kelly's Cellars, actually. This has been around since Irish revolutionaries who visited it back in the 1700s. A real, I won't say lowbrow, but kind of place where average people are just going to be enjoying, just hanging out. No pretenses. I love this place. The interior is one of those places where you'll see the Irish language glorified, or I won't say glorified, maybe displayed, because these people feel very Irish and are likely of the nationalist persuasion. You begin to sort of get a reading without, asking people questions, how they feel or what camp they're from. You just start to be sort of reading the scene. Now, this is something kind of unique in the north of Ireland. They're soccer fans, but what they're soccer fans of are Glasgow soccer teams, because those are bigger Premier League teams. There are two soccer teams that they like, and guess what? One for each community. Glasgow Celtic on the left is more the nationalist Catholic club, and Glasgow Rangers on the right is more the Unionist Protestant club. Again, they're not ever fighting about religion or the Pope's teachings. They're just sort of two different communities who have been really feeling very British or very Irish. That's really the main crux of this. Do you want to be British or do you want to be Irish? And this is who they identify with, and they sort of pick their sides. It's gotten quite an excellent rivalry, but what they've done is introduced now hockey, because it's a fresh sport that doesn't have any history. Ben, cricket is a British game and Gaelic football is an Irish game. And if you're trying to play either one, it's sort of some baggage that comes along with it to the other community. So they brought in hockey, and I don't know, have you ever thought of a more more brotherhood than in hockey? The Crown Saloon in Belfast is a Victorian National Trust protected site. I've seen it in a couple different movies. It's just a treasure inside there. This is in central Belfast. The Flanagans, Mr. Flanagan owned the Crown with his wife. He was Catholic, she was Protestant. They were arguing over what they should call it. She won the argument. She said, it's going to be the Crown. He said, okay, as long as we can wipe our feet on it as we walk through the door. So you'll hear playful tales like that across Northern Ireland. And the interior, look at that. It's just got a super cool, very woody, and very friendly. I want to emphasize, these are very friendly places that you'd enjoy. Little snugs where you can have little private conversations with a half a dozen other close friends, and at least pop your head in there when you're in Belfast. Now we're moving into the Titanic Quarter, which is sort of the industrial dockyard of Belfast. When I first started going there in 1981, this was a derelict and sort of slowly dying area, a high unemployment. And the shipping industry was moving to places like South Korea and Singapore. So, but the Titanic Quarter, of course, is named after the famous ship, which was built in Belfast. And these shipyards were important enough and strategic enough that the Nazis bombed them in World War II 4 times.
I think those cranes used to be the largest in the world.
That's right, yeah. The Harland and Wolff shipyard there, that used to be the largest crane in the world. Now, there's a beautiful new center in Belfast called the Titanic Museum, and it's definitely worth a visit. But I will tell you that it is the most popular place in Northern Ireland. So absolutely buy your tickets in advance. And brace yourself, because tickets are about 25 pounds, 24 or 25 pounds, which is over 30 bucks. So you really want to have a strong interest in the Titanic. But if you do, this is definitely the place to go. Now, the thing about the Titanic Belfast Museum is that it's not full of relics so much, because pulling relics up from there is sort of robbing a grave. So they're trying to respect those who passed. But it's excellent at telling you how the shipyards sort of affected the the culture of Belfast. You can see, all the shipyard workers, and now today off on the left, when you're walking outside there, you're looking at the outlines of how big the Titanic would have been. This is exactly where it sat as it was being built before it went into the dry dock. And these are actually the lifeboats, those little sort of oval things in the pavement.
Incredible.
Yeah. And they've turned the planning office, the draftsman's office into a really cool little bar right next door. Kind of a fun lunch option, or just have a beverage after you visited the Titanic Museum. Now, adjacent to it are also the Thompson dry docks. And I kind of poo-pooed this at first. I thought, boy, it's just a big concrete trough. And until I walked into it. It's just sort of awe-inspiring how large this ship was. It was the largest human-made object at the time. Now, another one of our guides in Northern Ireland is a terrific guide named Susie Millar. She's also in the guidebook, just like Lynn Corcoran. She's got a very personal connection to the Titanic because her great-great-grandfather was a crewman on the Titanic. And he gave his two sons 2 pennies and said, after I've made enough money over on the other side, I will send for you and you'll come over to the United States and be with me. But he didn't make it. He went down with the ship. So the 2 pennies got handed down from generation to generation down to Susie. Terrific guide. She used to be with the BBC. Now they have a sense of humor about this, Ben. It's 100 years later, so they can laugh about it now. My favorite one is that postcard there on the right. She was all right when she left here. We didn't do it. We just built it right. Or Titanic built by Irishmen and sunk by an Englishman. Now, in South Belfast, it's a very relaxed neighborhood with beautiful botanic gardens. It's where the Queen's University is. It's a very cosmopolitan, open-minded, ethnically mixed. I love the South Belfast area. And if you're a botanist, check out the greenhouses here. The Ulster Museum is nearby as well, and definitely gives you the natural history of Northern Ireland. And also explains that Northern Ireland's role in World War II, where it was the closest crossing to Europe, was from Newfoundland to Northern Ireland. So very strategic during the war. Now, when TV came to Ireland in the early 60s, they were watching similar stuff that we saw. For example, the civil rights movement in the United States, and the Catholics who were not getting the best jobs, not getting the best housing, much higher unemployment rate, were inspired by Martin Luther King and began their own civil rights movements. So I don't want to go too far into depth on the Troubles here, guys, but I'll just mention to you that if you really do want to dig into the Troubles, definitely check out on PBS this excellent series called Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland. I can't praise it highly enough. If the Troubles is your interest, and if conflict resolution and how it really affected the average person over there is of interest to you, then this is terrific. Spend time with PBS. Now, this is what I remember on TV when I was in high school in the 70s. Right as we were coming out of Vietnam, it felt like here came the Northern Ireland problem. So today it's very different in Northern Ireland, where the British Army moved out of Northern Ireland about a decade ago. So a very minimal presence there now. When I was there in '81, you would see bomb damage like what we're seeing there on the left. And today, you would never know it had ever happened on the right. This is a plastic bullet. One of the taxi drivers that I took a tour from had one in his glove compartment to show me. So that's what was shot at people during riots. And it wasn't intended to be fatal, but occasionally it was. You'll also hear about the H Block hunger strike. There were 10 IRA prisoners who died in 1981. That was going on when I was there. And it was surreal to be, for example, walking out of a movie theater with your mind in the movie and then seeing a British patrol on the other side of the street working their way down the street. It was a war zone then, and it's not now.
Are they buried? Is their burial place a popular visitors?
Yeah,
it's in central Belfast.
it's in central Belfast. Yeah, Milltown Cemetery is definitely worth a visit. It's a holy shrine to Irish nationalists. It's the grave of terrorists to Irish unionists. So you always kind of need to remember that that it wasn't that long ago when they were truly at each other's throats. Now, there's a marching season in Northern Ireland. In the unionist community, they march. In the nationalist community, they don't like the marching because it sort of is a triumphant celebration of the Battle of the Boyne, which cemented the Protestant King of William of Orange on the throne and got rid of the last Catholic British king, which was James II. So they burned these huge towers of pallets on July the 12th, just a couple of weeks ago, to celebrate the Battle of the Boyne victory in the Unionist community. They march, the Orangemen march every year. It's a tradition, controversial, but long-standing. And they say that kids in Northern Ireland have, by age 10, they have 27 different, on average, 27 different ways to tell which community you're in. Not just the name, sometimes the apparel, like the colors of the soccer jerseys, sometimes something you wouldn't think of, like the size of women's earrings. I remember when I was there on the Catholic communities, you had big hoop earrings, and in the national or in the Protestant communities, you had little tiny little earrings that may have just been the style of that time, but you could start to notice these things that were somewhat true between the communities. So it's a lot for a youngster to sort of think of and sort of absorb. It'll be interesting to see how the future shakes out in the North. Now, I highly recommend a black taxi tour. Black taxi tours are a great way to get a local voice for an hour to tell you, their view. They're somewhat biased. They try to be very, fair to either side, but they grew up in one community or the other, so you're going to probably over time find out a bit about their own biases or their own personal views of the situation. In the nationalist Catholic community, the Falls Road, they celebrate Bobby Sands, who was the first of the hunger strikers to die. His favorite quote was, "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children." You can take a tour in these neighborhoods from locals who have a strong feeling on the subject. This is a former IRA prisoner giving us a tour of the Falls Road. Now, over on the unionist side of the track, so to speak, they also have tours that will explain and highlight their particular points of view and their history, their culture. But I think this is the healthiest thing that I've seen in Northern Ireland, is the change in the murals. The mural on the left was very aggressive with a paramilitary and a black balaclava, they called them, and sort of trying to intimidate people. And then they changed them to the mural on the right, which is more culturally, what shall I call it? Well, just more culturally positive, I would say, with King William of Orange, and still celebrating that victory, but not quite in the aggressive paramilitary way that they did before. Trying to celebrate culture over conflict. You'll find the peace walls throughout Belfast, and this one is the most accessible one that we visit, Cooper Way Peace Wall. They've extended it 3 times as they continue to build it higher and higher, because this is a contact point between 2 communities where during bad times they'd be throwing things over at the other people on the other side of the wall.
Is it okay to take pictures of murals, Pat?
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. Absolutely. This quick little story here. The Ulster Volunteer Force came into being to protect the Unionist community and their Britishness in their mind, but they are a paramilitary group, like the counterbalance to the IRA. And they tried to intimidate a particular church by putting UVF on the roof. And the pastor came out and he painted L in front of the U, turned the U into an O, and turned the F into an E. And I thought that was a perfect response. You know, Rick is a real foodie, and there is great food to be had in Northern Ireland, especially fish. Fish dishes are terrific, but there's great bar food too. This is a very Northern Irish bar meal. This is called bangers and mash, sausage and potatoes. If you're looking for pub grub that's specific to Northern Ireland. The Cathedral Quarter is a fun party district within Belfast that I enjoy very much. If you want to get out and socialize, it's just fun, it's relaxing, no worries. The Dirty Onion and the Yardbird are a couple of our favorite restaurants within that neighborhood. And I love the sense of humor of the Irish when they're trying to get you to come in and do business in their bar. Now, please understand that there's a rowdy side to all of Ireland, a rowdy side that comes out on the weekends and is guaranteed to be in the pub underneath your bedroom in your hotel until 2 in the morning making noise. So just understand that if you're in a hotel with a bar on the ground floor and it's a weekend, bring twisty earplugs because you might just be hearing the party people going all night. An average, or I should say an example of a chain hotel or a sort of a business hotel in Belfast, here at the Europa, probably the best hotel in Belfast, the Europa. For example, President Clinton stayed there. This just kind of gives you an idea of a bit of a cookie cutter sort of approach versus down in the Queens neighborhood. It's more of a mom and pop kind of approach with more quirky sort of things like a beam in the bathroom that you're guaranteed to clunk your head on when you walk in there in the dark. Very friendly neighborhood down around Queens. And Ben, you've spent quite a bit of time in Poland. Maybe you know this, but Polish is the second most spoken language in Ireland because so many Polish guys and gals have come over to work in the same way that, for example, Hispanic workers began to come across into the United States for better opportunities. Once the wall came down, the Poles came across. Now, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, I'll just mention this. Definitely, you can take tours of Game of Thrones filming sites. Many of the filming sites in Northern Ireland are many of the Game of Thrones locations in Northern Ireland. You might just recognize. I know much of it was filmed in Iceland and Morocco and over in Croatia. But Northern Ireland is the base for Game of Thrones, and that's where the indoor studio was, where a lot of the interiors were shot.
And a lot of these are well located, Pat, so people could easily include them when visiting other
Easily,
especially in the north. It's like,
yeah, very easy. Yeah, it'll be a tour that'll leave Belfast on a coach for the day and show you all these sites and return you back at the end of the day to see, you know, this road, the Dark Hedges, which was, for example, one of the main scenes in one of the early episodes. So let's leave Belfast here. Let's start talking about getting outside of the city. And on either side of the Belfast Loch, that bay there, you'll see railroad tracks that you could use on light rail to visit, I would say 1 day on either side. So let's start with the southern side of the bay there. You'll see Cultra, the Ulster Transport and Folk Museums, Bangor, the Somme Museum, and Mount Stewart House. So let's take a look at these. You couldn't see all 5 of those in a day, but that's your sort of your menu of choices. Easy light rail. This is where you can see thatched roof sort of culture and understand how it came from just right outside the door, pretty much. They used what they had to build. This is a transport museum as well. And you may not know it, but the DeLorean was built in Belfast because of the high unemployment back in the early 80s when I was there on the first trip. The DeLorean was being built there, and it was a very exciting time. Unfortunately, that company did fail. Bangor is my favorite bedroom community outside of Belfast. It's a very British feeling town. They're definitely a unionist town, a very unionist community. Not hard to pick that out when you start looking at the windows, the window displays and shops and so on. The Somme Museum is to the Battle of the Somme, where the number was 57,000 guys were casualties on day one of the Somme. We lost 50,000 guys in our whole time in Vietnam, but they lost it on day one in the Somme. Just a bloodbath. So if you're a World War I historian, you should visit the Somme Museum. Now, Mount Stuart House is the most beautiful manor house in Northern Ireland. Definitely worth it for the gardens, and the interior is lovely, absolutely gorgeous. Just now moving up to the other side of the loch. Now we're on the north side of the loch. You could take a train or a light rail ride up here to visit Carrickfergus Castle, probably the best castle in the Belfast area. It's where King William of Orange first landed when he was beginning his campaign to defeat James II. One of my very favorite hikes in the North Bend is this one, the Gobbins hike, about an hour and a half, but no, more like about an hour outside of Belfast. You do need to reserve this. You can't just go out and walk it on your own, but it's fantastic, rocky sort of splash zone hike that, again, you want to have decent footwear on to get around.
Is it because of the waves that come in, Pat?
Yeah, yeah. The ocean, this is ocean water. It's awfully calm on the day that I was there, but if the waves are splashing, then you want to have some sort of covering for your camera so you don't get salt water on it. But it's a beautiful, beautiful hike.
How long did it take you?
I was probably an hour and a half.
Okay, not bad.
Yeah, not bad. And not that strenuous, but irregular ground continually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Glengarriff Forest Park. This is one of the glens of Antrim. A little further up the coast as we move our way around the coast of Northern Ireland. You hike down into this lush, gorgeous little valley and just view wonderful, wonderful waterfalls. This is a real treasure. I just discovered this in one of my last visits to Ireland. I didn't know it was there. Hidden gem. Footwear. I used to wear the stuff on the right, but that tennis shoe on the right, but in deep moss, I'd have wet toes. So be sure to get something that you can walk through wet grass with, like a rubber-toed boot, like on the left.
My mother used to say, you need to commit. You either wear flip-flops and just get wet or go with the waterproof shoes. Nothing in the middle like sneakers.
There you go. Yep. Now, Portrush is probably our favorite base town for the Antrim Coast, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful coastlines in all of Europe, let alone Ireland. It gives the Dingle Peninsula a run for its money, if you have heard of that, down in the Republic of Ireland, down in the south. Lovely town that was built as a Victorian seaside resort when the railroads were built and gave people access. The common man could go to the beach for the weekend. Built on a peninsula and easy town to walk around, very compact. Train stations right in the middle of town. I like Portrush quite a bit.
There's golfing here too, isn't there?
You bet there is. You bet. We're going to show that golf in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a golfer's dream up there. But it's also kind of a lowbrow, Coney Island, arcade sort of a vibe for the kids and families as well. Now, motorcycle racing is huge in Northern Ireland. I don't know motorcycle racing very well at all, but beware that in May every year, the Northwest 200 race really fills up the town with thousands and thousands of people. So if you're a fan, go. If you're not, then avoid that particular week. You'd have to Google exactly when it is in May every year. You talked about golf, Ben. Yeah. So Rory McIlroy is the #2 golfer in the world right now. Just came in third in the British Open and came in second in the PGA. But also major winners are Graham McDowell and Darren Clark, and the Royal Portrush Golf Course has been the site of the British Open itself back in 2019 and way back in 1954, I think, and will be again in 2025. So here's a tip. If you want a dream golf vacation idea for Ireland, go and visit the British Open in 2025 when it will be back there at the Royal Portrush. The Antrim Coast is absolutely gorgeous, and I love to hike along the Antrim Coast. One of our book maps here shows the features of, or I should say the attractions on the North Coast. We're looking at maybe a 20-mile span there. So it's very easy to see everything on this map in a day. The main draw is the Giant's Causeway, a geologic wonderland of basalt columns that cracked almost like a, have you ever walked across a dry lake and seen how the cracked mud is prismatic like this?
Yes.
Or hexagonal might be a better word for it. That's what you've got going here in the north, that unique type of volcanic geology. And people put coins between the rocks as sort of almost like a wishing well, making a wish and leaving them behind.
It looks man-made,
Almost, yeah, yeah. Rick says it looks like a pack of cigarettes opened up with all the cigarettes, at different heights. Now, the whole coastline there is absolutely terrific to hike. And there's a 5-mile hike that I really enjoy from Dunluce Castle ruins back to the Causeway. You get great views down on the geologic features of the Causeway Coast, they call it, because of a legend of two giants, a giant in Scotland and a giant in Northern Ireland who fought across the Causeway, and eventually the Causeway was pulled down in the legend. This gives you a kind of a feel for what the terrain is like. You're hiking right along the edge of the cliff, but getting great views. It's impossible to get lost, and it's very well marked. They're very efficient and on the ball with that in the north. And I think it's a very, very pretty section of the coastline up there.
Yeah, Pat, I went here on our 14-day Ireland tour, and I can just only echo what you have to say about the beauty of this area. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah. I really love it. It was one of my favorite places on a 14-day tour, actually.
Fantastic. You don't think of Northern Ireland first, maybe perhaps for scenery, but consider it. I mean, especially if you're a photographer and a hiker. One of the oldest distilleries in the world is the Bushmills Distillery in the town of Bushmills. 1608 is when it was founded, 1 year after Jamestown in Virginia. So you think about our first permanent settlement in the 13 colonies. This was founded the next year. Bushmills, boy.
We should have a taste.
We should have a taste, shouldn't we? Yeah, you bet, you bet. So while Ben has disappeared here for a second, I'll just mention that Bushmills whiskey, or I should say Irish whiskey in general, is distilled 3 times. That's one of its differences between it and Scotch or bourbon. Scotch and bourbon are generally distilled twice. I had 2 uncles who just were Scotch connoisseurs. They preferred Scotch most, but when I do taste whiskey, I like Irish whiskey because the 3 distillations makes it even smoother.
And Pat, here we have, what is it? Bushmills Black Bush.
Right? Yeah, so Black Bush is one of the finest of the Bushmills whiskeys. And when I first went over in '81, you couldn't get this in the United States, believe it or not. You can now, but Bushmills Black Bush was something I brought back from my dad as a little bit of a keepsake from Ireland. So let's do my dad's favorite toast, okay? So may your hands always have work to do. May your purse always hold a coin or two. May the sun always shine on your window pane. May the rainbow be following every rain. May the hand of a friend always be with you. And may God fill your heart with gladness to cheer you. Sláinte.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Only the best for Monday Night Travel.
That's right.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you bet.
Nothing like Irish whiskey.
Absolutely. So when you're in the town of Bushmills to visit the distillery, take a walk around the town. because this is a town that's just bursting with Unionist pride. And it's so interesting to sort of walk along the street and look at these banners. Maybe you knew this, Ben, but the Union flag is the combination of the St. Patrick's Cross, which is Irish, St. Andrew's Cross, Scottish, and St. George's Cross, of course, English. You lay all three on top of each other and you get what people oftentimes call the Union Jack, but actually a Union Jack is on a ship. It's the Union flag when it's on land.
I have no idea.
Yeah, me neither. Some of the other heroes of Northern Ireland, C.S. Lewis, an excellent author who you've probably heard of, Chronicles of Narnia, for example. One of their other heroes there in the middle is Joey Dunlop, one of the best road racers of motorcycle sport. And I know Dolly Parton wasn't born in Northern Ireland, but they take pride in people of Scots-Irish descent, and she definitely is. And also along the lines of that music that I talked about before with the Appalachian sort of Scotch-Irish tint. Now, don't laugh, but King William of Orange, his nickname was King Billy. And so if you were a follower of King William and came across to the 13 colonies, you were called a Billy Boy. And when you were looking for more land over in Kentucky and Tennessee, you went over the hills, so you became a hillbilly. That's literally where the term comes from. So my very favorite castle in Northern Ireland is this one. This is Dunluce Castle on a headland there just outside of Portrush, maybe 4 or 5 miles away. And easy to just reach by taxi, or there are buses in the summer. Now, it's built out on a headland, and I was out there with a tour group one year, and they were doing archaeology, and I never knew that just 6 inches right underneath our feet was an entire planned town. You'll notice that in the architecture of the castle, if you look closely, those big rounded stones built into the castle were taken from the Causeway, natural local building material. Now look at the right end of the castle. It ends abruptly. That cliff collapsed in 1639 and took the kitchen of the castle all the way down into the water, over 100 feet. And that kitchen had a few servants in there trying to cook the meal for the master and his wife. And I had an Irish guy joke with me that was the invention of fast food. Yeah, so it's a very scenic stop on the northern coast. And another great stop is the Carrick-a-Reid rope bridge, which you can hike out to. You don't have to cross the bridge. You can do 90% of the hike without crossing the bridge. So if you have an aversion to heights, be careful. You don't have to go across, but it reaches out to that headland you see in the distance, the bridge. It was actually built by fishermen to get out to the headland where they knew that the salmon were running close to the coast and they could hang nets. So I'd really like it out there. Bird watcher's paradise.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. There's the fisherman's cabin on the headland out there. Now we're moving on to Derry or Londonderry. If you're Irish, you call it Derry. If you're British, you call it Londonderry, because in the early 1600s, when the plantation took place, guilds from London built this huge wall, fortified it, invested money into it, and they called it Londonderry. So just what you call the town kind of betrays your politics or which side of the tracks you come from. Since about 70% of the people in this town are Irish and Catholic, we call it Derry because that's what they call it. I really like Londonderry, Derry. Derry is a friendly town. It has the most diverse history of any of the Northern Irish towns. This was running as a monastic site for St. Columcille, who after St. Patrick and St. Bridget is sort of the third most venerated saint in Irish Catholicism anyway. And Doira is the Irish word for an oak grove, which was later anglicized to Derry. Spanish Armada ships crashed on the shore outside of Londonderry, Derry, and you can visit some of their artifacts in the museum at the there at the walls inside of the walls in Derry. The relief of Derry was a huge siege that took place for 105 days, where the Unionists were stuck inside and King James's Catholic troops were outside, and they withstood the siege. They got ships to crash through the boom, and it's one of the major heroic moments in the Unionist history. They lost thousands of people starving inside the walls during the siege, and that mound is a mass grave of hundreds and hundreds of people who starved during the siege, and it's called the Heroes' Mound. And on the west side of Derry, there's a small Unionist community that still kind of feels like they're under siege, and they have their community curbstones are blue and white and red as the colors of the Union Jack flag. No surrender. So for us, we first started to hear about the troubles in Northern Ireland in the late 60s when TV came in, and police brutality was seen on TV, and that really began to tip the scales on people's feelings. The modern troubles were started sort of around here in 1968. You know, it was kind of the hippie times and the, you know, that sort of hang loose sort of mentality, but the British Army had to come in to keep the peace. And that kind of coexistence obviously became friction over time. Here's the Civil Rights March that is commemorated or known as Bloody Sunday, in which 14 civil rights marchers were shot by British troops who claimed that they were under threat by snipers, but almost all 14 were shot in the back, which means that they were running away. So the British government apologized during the, oh boy, about 10 years or so ago to clear the names of the those who died who at the time were thought to be terrorists, but were just innocent people in a civil rights march. You can visit the site there in the Bogside area of Derry. Now, this gentleman that we're seeing with his hands on the wall there is one of my personal heroes. His name is John Hume. He was a teacher in the Bogside, just a school teacher who wanted to start a small community fund, like a savings and loan, so that people could pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get out of the poverty that the Bogside was in, with unemployment that was approaching 40%. And he was considered someone suspicious, but eventually used his political skills. He entered politics, and the picture in the lower right shows him as the leader of the SDLP, raising hands with the Unionist leader, David Trimble, who was the majority leader of the Unionist camp at that time. And they got they co-won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 1998. His likeness is in the murals in the Bogside, along with their other heroes, Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa and Mandela. It was my absolute highlight as a guide to run into him on the street, just an average guy. And he was kind enough to stop and talk to us for a few minutes after he'd retired. John Hume has since passed away, but he deserves quite a bit for getting the peace process started in 1998, taking the risk. So this is a community in the Bogside of Derry that feels very put upon by being inside the United Kingdom. They feel Irish. They wish they were outside of the United Kingdom. They wish they were in Ireland. So they feel solidarity with, for example, Palestinians who are within Israel, but yearning to have more control over their own fate. So you'll oftentimes see Palestinian flags or Basque flags or other, regional flags in the Bogside. Ben, I took this picture back on March 25th of 1981. Yeah, and wow. I only know that was the date because Bobby Sands had been on hunger strike since March 1st. So it had to be March 25th. And look at that. It was just a war zone at that time with that high unemployment. But today it's very much a different, relaxed community, so different from those days. Here's one of our colleagues, Stephen, as a young man on the left there. He was a local guide in Derry, who is now one of our guides on our tours. Excellent guide. He was showing one of my groups around early on before he started working with us as a tour guide. And this was the way Derry used to look with a British Army post up there in the background, with a listening post. And we were under surveillance on the right here with a little swivel camera that was literally watching us. And my tour members were nervous. And Stephen just said, look, everybody relax, just wave at the camera. We turned around and waved at the camera, and suddenly the camera froze and the little windshield wiper went. So you knew there was a human being on the other side. It was just, you know, checking out the group. The Museum of Derry and Bog site is very educational from the nationalist Catholic side of the tracks, where when British patrols would come in and try and raid and try and find their brothers or husbands or whomever might have been in cahoots with the IRA, they would bang trash cans on the ground to warn the entire community. So that's what you're seeing on the right are those trash can lids. And on the left, you're seeing Bernadette Devlin, one of the members of Parliament, the youngest member of Parliament elected at age 22 from the bog site. Boy, did she make trouble in British Parliament. Now, this is the oak leaf and the symbol of Derry on the right. That was designed actually by kids, believe it or not, a peace dove within a leaf of the oak. Can you kind of see that on the right?
Absolutely.
It's and you see it's going from the darkness of the lower left-hand corner to the lightness of the sun in the upper right-hand corner. So very, very symbolic when you get a chance to understand it. However, this is my very favorite mural in all of Northern Ireland. When I first came to Derry and saw this mural for the first time, the gun was black. It was a solid piece. It was pointed up, and the butterfly was gray. And they said, if peace ever comes to Northern Ireland, we'll finish this mural. And it was actually one of the painters, his niece, who was killed by a ricochet. That's her in the poster, or in the mural rather. So suddenly I came back one year and they'd broken the gun, meaning peace has come. The gun is out of the action, and life has come back in the colors of the butterfly. The Hands Across the Divide statue on the left between the two communities, a hopeful future. And on the right is the Peace Bridge in Derry, which the Dalai Lama opened up. This is the festive day when he was visiting. It sort of bridges between the two sides of the Foyle River, which sort of separate basically the nationalist Catholic side of the tracks from the Protestant Unionist side. So we're coming down the home stretch here, Ben, but I just wanted to really emphasize half a dozen really important preliminary things you would want to do if you're visiting Northern Ireland. These are reservations that you really want to get in advance so that you're not shut out when you get there or stuck waiting in a long line. The Titanic Belfast, which we saw, the Bushmills Distillery, the Giant's Causeway, there's a little bit of fine print here. Anybody can walk the causeway any time of day. I was there with a buddy at sunset on the longest day of the year, June 22nd, to try and get nice sunset shots. You can walk the trail, but what you have to reserve is the parking, the visitor center, which is very good, explaining the geology, an audio guide to listen to as you're walking the trail, the restrooms and everything else, but the trail is free. The Carrick-a-Reid Rope Bridge is so popular now because of the Game of Thrones crowds that come through that you need to actually make a reservation there to cross the bridge. The Gobbins hike that we saw is rough enough that they don't want people doing it on their own. So you have to make a reservation for that with a guide. And of course, a local guide like I was showing in Belfast to just show you the lay of the land for the first day. These are all in our guidebook, so don't feel like you have to memorize it, but that's the toolbox. Again, I just want to mention our guidebook is the toolbox for you to take along to answer your questions as you're traveling. So I've just only got maybe half a dozen images left here, Ben, but what we're going to do now, we've gone all the way along the coast. We're going to go through the interior to make our way from Derry back to Belfast. And again, you couldn't see all these sites in a day, but I want to give you an idea of what the interior of Northern Ireland is like. And the number one thing I'd have you do is, sorry, this is the lake within the center of Northern Ireland, which is a big eel fishery, which is a delicacy in Northern Europe, Scandinavia and stuff. But anyway, the Ulster American Folk Park is really interesting to Americans of Scots-Irish descent because this is their story, definitely. And in this park, you get a feel for how they used to live, where they were taxed on the size of their windows. The more glass you could afford, the richer you must have been. So tiny little windows, they called it daylight robbery, literally. They looked for a better life. They came across on cramped conditions in the ships, 6-week voyage over to the 13 colonies back in the 1700s. And when they got to the 13 colonies, they have to hack their way through the Appalachians into Indian fighting country. Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett are both of Scots-Irish ancestry. Andrew Jackson, Mark Twain. I mean, there's some excellent people that were part of that upbringing. Here we go with U.S. Grant and Woodrow Wilson and Andrew Jackson, for example, here among other notables who helped to really get the United States where it is today. You can see their heartland in the Appalachians there on the left. And when you visit a folk park like this, part of the fun is the crafts that are going on. They're trying to reenact the actual ways that things were done with spinning wool and basket weaving and so on. And if nothing else, this is a beautiful walk in the woods. One of the prettiest little forest groves that I've been in Ireland is here around the Ulster American Folk Park. If you're a fisherman or a bird watcher, go down to the lakes of Fermanagh, down near the border with the Republic. And out there is an island called Boa Island that has some very interesting ancient Celtic carvings that we really don't know the meaning of for sure, probably Celtic deities. The Belique Pottery Center is out there if you're a collector of porcelain. Best Stone Circle is this on Beagmore up in the north. And St. Patrick, underneath that big slab there is supposedly his grave. Yeah, the legend is that when St. Patrick died, they put his body in an ox cart and just waited for the ox to stop walking. And wherever it stopped walking is where God said he should be buried. So apparently it was here, according to the legend. So let me just kind of close this with my hopes that you guys get a chance to visit Northern Ireland. I really think it's worth it. I don't think it's anywhere to be afraid of. I just hope you get a chance to check it out.
Oh, Pat, that was just fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You know, I really enjoyed Derry. That was also my favorite city.
Yeah.
I think it's the largest or the most preserved walled
Yes.
town in Ireland, right?
Well, it was one of the last walls in Europe that were built before gunpowder kind of made them obsolete. And yeah, it's almost like a Great Wall of China kind of wandering through around the hill up there.
Yeah, I thought it was just terrific. And I don't know if they use it anymore, but years ago when I was there, the Tourist Information Office used the term to describe the city. It's the Derry best. And I would sum it up in a sentence.
You know, they've got another one kind of like that. I like that one. They call it legendary. Legendary.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, you know, the way you combine the history, the complexity, the travel tips for Northern Ireland is truly fantastic, and it exemplifies your level of knowledge. So I'm so appreciative that you took the time to
My pleasure,
be
Ben.
with us. And you know, I'm not going to go and divert in any way from what you've discussed already for tonight's word from our sponsor. That's just how good the Ireland Guidebook is. I read the Northern Ireland chapter ahead of tonight, and if you thought that Pat did a great job describing this region here tonight, wait until you get this book and start reading, because it is fantastic. The way it breaks down everything is just so understandable.
Thank you.
because going into it, it's just, I think many
Yeah.
people just kind of have a general sense of things.
Yeah.
This really just breaks it down and makes it palatable.
Well, thank you. It's been a labor of love, and I just always use this term. It's a toolbox, guys. It's something really small and easy to pack along that will, be a low-tech way when you don't have Google around to get some answer that hasn't been curated for you. So, yeah, I hope you get a chance to go.
And it was recently updated. This is January of this
Yeah,
year.
that's
so-
right. That's right. That's right.
And how did it first become a member of our guidebook?
Yeah. So when I started with Rick in 1997, we had a Great Britain and Ireland book. Rick had written a Dublin chapter, a Dingle chapter, a Belfast chapter, and a Galway chapter. And that's all that existed. And he tossed the ball to me and said, run with it and say, let's make an Ireland book from these first 4 chapters and split it away from the Britain book. And it turned out to be something I didn't expect to get involved in, but boy, it was just such a cool way to be in touch with that culture for so long. And it's been 25 years working on the book. This is my last edition where you'll see my name on it, but I hope you guys make use of it.
Well, more than one of us have referred to you, Pat, as Mr. Ireland, and that's for good reason.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Yeah.
Well, I think Julianne has been sending me along some great questions. So let me take a look here at what our viewers have submitted. Pat, Becky is curious, is it difficult for Americans to understand Irish English?
Oh, a great question. Was it Becky?
Correct.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Becky, I would say it's a bit of a challenge because they speak very quickly. They're excited and enthusiastic speakers. If you want to get a kind of a taste of what it sounds like in Northern Ireland, check out Derry Girls. Derry Girls is a Netflix half-an-hour situation comedy, lowbrow. You're not getting deep history here, but it's fun. I literally have to use the subtitles because their slang is so sly and fast that yeah, it's just almost like its own language.
Well, I was going to ask you about Derry Girls later, Pat. So
Yeah.
you've taken another one of my questions. Carolina is wondering, Pat, is the Irish language taught in Northern Ireland?
In the Catholic nationalist community, yes. It's unfortunately still a segregated community. Kids go to nationalist schools or unionist schools in general. So they're still separated. Unfortunately, there are camps that bring them together. But yeah, so in the Catholic communities, definitely on the Falls Road or out in the West, it would be taught. Now, the Gaelic communities that are still thriving are mostly on the West Coast, down around Mayo and Galway and Dingle and so on. But Irish pride among the nationalist Catholic community includes very much the use of the Gaelic language, which IRA prisoners used to use in prison to speak to each other almost like in code because the British guards wouldn't know what they're saying.
Very interesting. Thank you, Pat. Let's see, from Jeffrey. In your opinion, Pat, if Scotland votes to leave the UK, do you think Northern Ireland would stay in the UK or join Ireland?
That is the $1,000,000 question. I've thought about that a million times. Culturally, they have so much connection to Scotland. I could see that as a natural bridge for them to be together, in a sense. Or I could see the reunification of Ireland, which I never thought that would ever happen, but it could possibly happen. It's being rattled around now. Or the third option would be some sort of small truncated state of their own, not Scotland, not Ireland, just the country of Northern Ireland, rather than it being sort of a province of the UK. This is really interesting. I really don't know. When the day comes, if Scotland does leave, I know that Northern Ireland will probably have to make a move one way or the other, would be my guess.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Susan asks, is there a dry season in Ireland?
Yeah, about a half an hour every day in between. No, it's to give you an example, here in Seattle, we get a couple more inches of rain every year than does Dublin, but we get it all primarily between, let's say, November and April. In Ireland, it's more or less all year. It's sort of a flatter bell curve, which is sort of spread out. So what you get are these gales coming, or not gales, these weather systems coming in from the west that are like little ripples where it'll rain for an hour and then it'll get sunny and then it'll rain. Weather changes continually. But if you're asking me when to go, if it's about rain, if I had to pick a specific time to go to Ireland in general, it would be June because the daylight hours are longer. There's more sightseeing time.
Is the food in Northern Ireland much different from in the Republic, would you say?
I wouldn't say very different. I would say they're kindred spirits along those lines. Couple different taste changes in bars, bar food, but generally speaking, it's relatively similar and good quality.
A couple of travel focus questions here. When planning a Northern Ireland itinerary, how many days in the region do you think is smart or reasonable?
Okay, so I would say that most people can at least do a day trip to Northern Ireland from Dublin by train and just get a taste of it in Belfast. But if you really want to do it justice, like an accordion expanding it, you could spend a week in Northern Ireland. And I would start with 3 nights in Belfast, 2 nights in Portrush, 1 night in Derry, and then another night to get back to whichever airport you started from. And that would give you a really good look at the north.
Excellent. Excellent. That sounds fantastic, Pat. Thank you. When renting a car, is it acceptable to pick it up in the Republic and drop it off in Northern Ireland and vice versa?
Oh, great question. Great question. No, actually, I mean, yes, it's possible, but it will cost you big time. The drop-off charge to pick up a car in one country and then drop it off in another country is exorbitant and getting worse in post-COVID days. You can drive through another country, like, for example, over the border into the Republic with your rental car, but just make sure that you return it back in the north, in the same country that you rented it from, and tell them for sure that you have that you're going to be driving it into the Republic if you are, so that it's insured in case you do have a problem over there. But yeah, it's kind of verboten in a way to pick up in one country and drop in another.
Yeah, and right, exactly. It's the same as throughout much of Europe. It's just remembering that Northern Ireland is a different country.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just have one more question,
Sure.
Pat. You know, you've been traveling to Ireland, Northern Ireland for 40 years, more than 40 years. What keeps you going back? What pulls you back to Ireland time after time?
Well, you know, it's maybe a fascination with conflict resolution, because this is a place that I remember watching as a kid on TV, and what is all this all about? And now I've gotten a chance to sort of dip my toe into it. Nobody knows it like the people who live it. So I'm just an earnest observer, just sort of patching it together as I see it. But it's the conflict resolution. It's the I would say the growing optimism. You know, when I was first there, it was just a brickyard of rubble in many places, and now it's a growing, vibrant, exciting place.
Each time it's just better and better.
Yeah, for me, yeah,
Absolutely, and for me as well, I would say.
yeah, cool.
Yeah. Well, Pat, such a pleasure. Thank you
pleasure
so
too,
much.
Thank you.
I hope to see you back perhaps sometime on Monday Night Travel.
Okay.
And to all of our viewers, don't forget, next week we have Italian cooking. That'll be really something.
Cool.
Yeah, really excited for that. Good night, Pat. Good night, Julianne. Good night, everyone.